Let's start with last night's game. Were you surprised by how dominant the Niners were?
Well, yes and no, because you're kind of surprised that, the Super Bowl champs go down the way they did. But looking at the 3-4 year history of this rivalry, aside from that playoff game, the Niners have really controlled it. So I guess I'm not surprised to that extent. I thought the Rams would win that game, but in hindsight, I was the moron here. Look at the reason why the Niners have been so successful, again, for the large part of the last 3 or 4 years. It's because they've been the more physical team, because they've been able to control the game on the ground, because they've played really good defense, and every single one of those things came to fruition in a pretty dominant win last night.
I'll frame the question this way. How much of what we've seen from the 49ers through 4 weeks is this defense is just that good, and how much of it do you think is some weaker opponents?
Well, the defense is legitimately good, but then you look at, the hiccup against Denver. It looked like a team that was led by a quarterback who didn't have a training camp. So, of course they were out of sync. It made plenty of sense for why they struggled through a big portion, or basically the entirety of that game. But this is a team, especially offensively, they're still going to be trying to find themselves. And that's because Garoppolo basically had his entire August, or you know what, you could say his entire offseason wiped out, because he was coming back from the surgery. Obviously, as everybody knows, didn't think he was going to be with the team. And then all of a sudden he's back in it, and trying to get yourself up to full speed that quickly, especially coming off surgery. This isn't just a guy who took the off season off or anything like that. When you go through a rehab from a surgery, it throws off your entire off season timeline. And that's a real factor. So I think, this is a team that, it's funny. I heard Belichick explain it one time, several years ago, about what mid-season form is. And that's a real thing, because when you get into the season, everybody's sort of sloppy. Everybody's trying to figure out who they are. And then this mid-season form thing is real, because that's when these teams start to find themselves. They start to get into a rhythm. And I think that's going to be even more true for a Niners team that is just getting its quarterback into it.
Jeff Howe is with us. We're a month in. Totally agree with you, Jeff, as far as the timeline with NFL teams. Right now, though, when you look at this NFC West, everybody's 2-2. Should the Niners be the favorites?
With the way, I think with the way they just handled the Rams, yes, they should. And Seattle should not be considered a serious player. Maybe they surprised some teams, but that's a team that was supposed to have a down year. The Cardinals. When I was talking to, it was close to 20 people around the league for a survey I did in week 1, asking a lot of people around the league, front office executives, GMs, coaches, and so forth. And one of the questions was, who's going to have a down year? And a lot of these people picked the Cardinals as one of those teams. So I don't think they have a whole lot of staying power. Plus, you look at the way they finished the last 2 seasons, you sort of expect a slide later in the season anyway. So it's probably going to come down to the Rams and the Niners once again. And you see the way the Niners just kind of handled the Rams. And you should. You should, through week 4, consider them the favorites.
How much trouble are the Rams in?
That's a team that's really fighting it. And, they have some turnover on defense. They're struggling to get Allen Robinson involved. Matthew Stafford just doesn't look good. Now, do you hit the panic button on Stafford because of the elbow situation? I don't think so. And then you kind of look at last year, he went through stretches like this when he just didn't look good, or he made pivotal mistakes. And now we have the knowledge in hindsight to know that he was dealing with a significant amount of elbow pain last year. And ultimately they won the Super Bowl. So, they're a real interesting case, because Cincinnati struggling off of a Super Bowl loss was expected. The Rams struggling off a Super Bowl win kind of came out of left field, especially since I spent a couple days with them in August. This looked like a team that was ready to have a hot start. So I'm surprised that they're kind of fighting it in the early going.
Jeff Howe from The Athletic is with us here on Cattles and Ramie, Sactown Sports. Jeff, your thoughts on how the Tua situation was handled from the beginning up until this point?
Well, I think clearly when the PA exercises their right to relieve the spotter of his duties or fire him, however you want to word it, they think that this thing was sloppy. And I'm really interested to see how this kind of joint investigation plays out. Because, we all looked, you saw it in real time in week 3 when he crumpled to his knees there. I mean, that looks like a concussion. Now, you hear the information after the game that he had a back injury. You can kind of wrap your head around it and say, okay, well, you know what? Your back locks up. Maybe you do stumble like that. Maybe you can kind of compartmentalize and say, all right, you know what? Maybe we just all misread this thing. But then seeing what happened 4 or 5 days later on Thursday Night Football, I mean, clearly something was missed. And, I think I don't want to rush to conclusions because this, you've learned over the years, this isn't a torn ACL. It's not a broken leg. It's not an injury that you can visibly see while watching from afar. You kind of just have to trust all the information that's processed behind the scenes and then kind of make your judgments from there.
Do you think that there's got to be some kind of mechanism in play? I know that the whole thing is protecting players from themselves, but at the same time, if Tua's, and I'm not putting Tua in a bad light in any way, if any player is not fully up front with a doctor when getting checked for a head injury or any other kind of injury, how are you supposed to treat something that you're not being told is necessarily there?
Yeah, you're totally right. And I think that's the $1 million question here, because players now 10 years ago, and you kind of hear some of these, the ex-players who are now in the media, they're telling these stories. Stories like this had been told a little more privately in, past years, but players would memorize the concussion test question, and they would know exactly how they were supposed to answer this thing. And they kind of trained themselves to be able to beat some of these questions and to get themselves back onto the field. And then you hear, Rodney Harrison saying, I think it was on Sunday Night Football, just, hey, it's not worth it. Like, I went through this, or he's seen players and teammates and friends go through this and everything they deal with in their post-playing careers. It's scary stuff. But yeah, I think something, something that's possible that comes out of this is when the spotter is looking at this from up in the box or wherever they happen to be, and they see a player crumple to the ground the way Tua did in week 3, that might be one of those things where it becomes automatic. And it's like, I don't care what you say about your back, about your knee, about whatever. That looks like a concussion. We're not prepared to diagnose it in real time. If they're not, because if the symptoms might not surface immediately, that's a natural thing, or that's a common thing that happens with concussion. But if they see that type of mechanism happen, you can just immediately say, you're done for the night.
Jeff, as always, thanks for the time, man. We'll catch up with you next week.
All right. Appreciate you guys. Have a good week.